Hello viewers, welcome back to another book to game comparison video. Today I'm going to be looking at the game The Creature of Kapu Cave and looking at the story it's based on and then looking at what the computer game turned out to be. So I will begin by looking at the novel, which was released in 1998 and is titled Mystery on Maui, and then after that I will go over the game, which of course is called The Creature of Kapu Cave and was released in 2006. As always, a spoiler alert is in effect because I'm going to go into details. I am going to talk about the culprits pretty quickly and quite openly. So if you don't want any of this information, I highly suggest not watching this video. And if you've already read the book, played the game, or don't really care about finding out spoiling information, then join me. Let's move on. So I always start by talking about the book because it is the source material, so that's what I'm going to do now. So the book that we are looking at is number 143 of the Nancy Drew Mystery Stories series. Again, these are also referred to as the Digest Paperback books. And it is the book Mystery on Maui. In this book, we see Nancy, Bess, and George going to the island of Maui to visit a former classmate named Danny. And Nancy and Danny remained pen pals for the few years he used to go to River Heights. He was there for, I think, a year and then moved back to Maui. So they've stayed in touch over the years, and he invites the girls to visit him for a bit of a holiday. So they do that. And when they're there, they meet a friend of Danny's named Josh, who's going to be competing in the Gulf Coast Surf-Off that coming weekend. And shortly after they meet him, his surfboard is nearly stolen. So Nancy chases this man who's stolen the board. He ditches the board and runs off, and she's able to recover it with just a few dings in it. But as the story goes on, there become more threats against Josh. Another one comes in the form of a letter delivered to Danny, trying to convince him to get Josh not to compete in the surf-off. And then later on, there is a venomous snake placed in a bag that Josh has. So someone is trying to scare Josh off, and it seems like it might be related to the surf-off. But the reasoning is what the big question is. Why is someone trying to get Josh to, not compete? So the characters in the book include the girl's friend Danny Takamura, Josh Brightman, who of course is the surfer we've already mentioned, or I've already mentioned, Ruby Blackwell, who is sort of a local surfing legend and a friend of the gang. She owns her own business where she sells surf gear. Then we have Hank Carter, who grew up with Danny. He's a few years older than him, is also a surfer, but not really a nice guy. And it's not that he's mean or not that he's really bad. He's just not really friendly. He tends to be more of a lone wolf. We also have Manny Manolo, who wanted to be a paramedic but is now a lifeguard. There's sort of a story that we might get into later on. Russell Fry, who does not care for Josh. He used to run a shark feeding business, which Josh had closed down or got involved and forced it to shut down. And then we have Timothy the Snake Cutter. The gang refers to him as the Snake throughout the story until they learn his name because he has this snake tattoo on his arm that they see. So we have quite a few people that the teens interact with and who they could all suspect of being involved in these threats against Josh, but they don't know why. They all have their own possible reason for not liking Josh. So what they wind up learning in the end is Ruby, dear friend as she may be, is really needing Hank to win the surfing competition. Ruby had designed this surfboard called the Stinger, and she has this potential contract that if someone surfing her board wins the surf-off, she's going to be able to pull herself out of debt by having this board now on the market. So that's why she wants Josh out of the competition. He'd refused to ride her board because he was comfortable with the one he already had. So she needed a guaranteed win, and she knows that Josh is really talented, and Hank had agreed to ride the board for her, but knew that Josh might still beat him. So that is the reason for all these attacks and threats against Josh, was to get him out of the competition so that Ruby would win through Hank riding her board. So that's the book. Now we can look at the game. This is game number 15 of the Nancy Drew Adventure game series, and it is called The Creature of Kapu Cave. In the game, we have Nancy, who's out helping an entomologist in the Hawaiian jungle. They're conducting field research. Meanwhile, we also have Frank and Joe Hardy, who have been invited by a gentleman named Richard Akins, and he would like them to investigate Pua Mapu and her dad, Mike. He says that he's thinking of signing Pua for a serving contract, and he wants to make sure there are no skeletons in the Mapu's closet. So along with this, we learn that the pineapple crop is suffering that year, and there's a rumor that Kaneokala is behind the trouble. This is this mythical being. And he's doing this because of the activities that are happening at the Hili Hili Research Center. These are secretive activities. No one knows what's actually happening there. So they're blaming Kaneokala saying that he's mad about whatever's going on at the research center. And that's why the pineapple crop is suffering. So then we've got a few characters in the game. We have Dr. Quigley Kim, so this is the entomologist whom Nancy's working for. There's Dr. Malachi Craven, who runs the Hili Hili Research Center. We have Big Island Mike, who runs the excursion or immersion excursion center, where the Hardys are located. And then his daughter, Pua Mapu, who loves to surf. She teaches surfing, and she possibly could be signed by Richard Akins. So as our sort of multiple mysteries unfold, because we get to play as Nancy as well as the Hardys, what is uncovered is that Mike Mapu is in some serious debt, and he decides to try to reclaim the property that the Hili Hili Research Center is located on. Now, the reason for this is that his aunt had actually bequeathed that property to the research center, but had said that should it ever close its doors for whatever reason, that property is reverted back to the Mapu. So Mike really wants that property back, probably in the hopes of selling it to pull himself out of debt. So in order to accomplish this plot, he and Pua tamper with the jungle's ecosystem by spraying pheromones, which influences the activity of insects and are therefore destroying the pineapple crop, which they're blaming on Kaneokala and the Hili Hili Research Center. So they sort of have this big plot to reclaim this land, and it has to involve some blame on multiple parties with the hope that the Mapus will get this land that they can then sell and, find themselves no longer in debt. So there's the game. Now let's do some comparisons. This is my favorite part of these videos. So I like going over what both stories are individually, but now I get to pick at specific pieces and compare very specific components, which I always find to be the most interesting. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the title, because it is different between our two stories. This is happening more frequently and will continue for the most part for the rest of the games. I know offhand that there is at least one more game that has the same title as the book. I don't know that there are any others, but we'll come to that in just a few games. We're nearly there. So for the purposes of this video, our book is Mystery on Maui, whereas our game is The Creature of Kapu Cave. So two very different titles. The book is very specific. Our story takes place on Maui, and that's where our mystery is. So Mystery on Maui. The game is a little different. The Creature of Kapu Cave, so it's picked up this very specific place that Nancy gets to go to in the game. Not that she spends a lot of time there. There is one big puzzle there, and this reference to a creature of Kapu Cave, and that's probably about all the webs that are there, and this is maybe a reference to Kaneokala. So more of a folklore, mythical relating title. So next, let's look at the storylines. For the book, Nancy and her friends are visiting a friend in Hawaii. That's their friend Danny, and there's this surf competition taking place, and their new friend Josh is threatened, and Nancy investigates. So pretty clear cut. The game is a little bit more convoluted. We have Nancy who's helping with field research, and she finds a trashed camp. She learns about a failing pineapple crop, as well as rumors of mythical beings showing their anger. So again, this is Kaneokala, and then still sort of on that vein of a mythical being, but the Hardys learn about this with Pele, who is this goddess sort of anger. And she comes up just in terms of the earthquake that is felt early in the game. So we've got Nancy's story, then we also have the Hardys who are investigating a surfer with potential to be sponsored, as well as this attack that's relating to stolen goods. This is also an attack on Joe, so that's more Frank investigating that part. So you can see our storylines are quite different. Now our locations are pretty much the same. The book takes place in Lahaina, Maui, which is also called the Valley Isle, whereas the game takes place on the Big Island, the island of Hawaii. So we're in the same state, just different islands. Next, we can look at the characters. We have one character who's sort of the same between stories. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go through the characters from the book first and then to the game. So starting with Josh from the book, he's a friend of Danny, and I've chosen not to include Danny because there's not actually a lot to say about him. He's sort of a means to an end for the story to take place in Hawaii. That might sound terrible, but that's really the purpose he serves. So he's a surfer. He's going to be competing in the Gulf Coast Surf-Off. He receives numerous threats. So that would be in terms of a letter, this venomous snake put in his bag. His surfboard is also nearly stolen, and then he's kidnapped. So there's a lot going on trying to get him not to compete in the surf-off. Next, we can look at Hank. He is a few years older than Danny, and he grew up with him and his friends. But he's sort of a lone wolf. He's not super friendly. He's also a bit of a flirt. He has a girlfriend, but he also kind of puts the moves on Nancy. And he also has a history with Ruby. They used to date, and Ruby will come up again in a moment. He will be competing in the surf-off, and he's going to be riding this board that Ruby designed, her stinger board. And he also loaned her money. So he's got quite a history and relationship with Ruby. So next we'll look at Manny, also only from the book. He is a lifeguard with a grudge against Josh. He had hoped to be a paramedic, and the two were doing this internship together. Josh made sort of a standard beginner's mistake. Manny blew up, and because of his intense reaction, he got booted from the program. And his hopes of becoming a paramedic were dashed, and he blames Josh for that. And he continues to blow up whenever he sees the surfer. So there's a lot of tension between Manny and Josh. Even though Josh himself is pretty easygoing, Manny is just not. Then we've got Russell. So he formerly ran a shark feeding operation. Josh wound up intervening, and because of him, he had it shut down. And Russell is pretty ticked about this. He used to, throw chum into the water, which would bring sharks up to the boat and, where they had dumped the chum, so that passengers or his paying customers could see sharks up close. And that is quite dangerous. It also is more likely to bring sharks into where people are. There's quite a few dangers as a result of that kind of business, and that's why Josh got involved and made sure it got shut down. So we can see a reason there for Russell to be mad with Josh. So next we'll look at the snake. This is the last character who's sort of book only. This is a nickname the teens give him, as I noted earlier, because of a snake tattoo on his arm. His real name is Timothy Cutter, which they don't realize until the end. He has a criminal record, and he is the one who is perpetrating these acts against Josh, trying to stop him from competing in the surf-off. And he does this at the request of Ruby. And so with that, let's talk about Ruby. And we're going to put Ruby and Pua together because they have some overlap between book and game. So in the book, Ruby is a local surfing legend who has since retired, and she's still fairly young. And she runs a business called Ruby's Place, where she sells surf gear. And she's in massive debt, which is apparently pretty common when you're trying to run a surf shop. She's also designed her own surfboard, and she needs to have someone ride it and win on that board in the surf-off in order to gain a contract selling the board. And because of that, she would then be able to pull herself out of debt. So that is the motivation for Ruby and her actions and why she wants Josh out of the competition. He's not riding her board. Her friend Hank is, and she really needs Hank to win. Now, if we look at Pua, who is fairly similar to her in some respects, she spends all of her time surfing. So again, surfing is her life, and she hopes to get signed and become a famous surfer. So unlike Pua, she hasn't yet established herself. She doesn't have that fame, but it is still a big part of her life. And her dad is the one who's in debt. It's not Pua herself, but her dad, and she helps him get out of debt by spraying pheromones in the jungle and placing blame on the Healy Healy for the failed pineapple crops. So there we can see our similarities, surfing and debt, motivators for both Ruby and Pua. And I will continue with just the game characters. So we've got Mike. I figure we'll move to him next because he's a relation of Pua, and he is the one who is in debt. So he's the operator of Big Island Mike's Immersion Excursion Center, and as already noted, he's in debt, and he's the one who plots to have the land that the Healy Healy is located on reverted back to him. So I don't really need to say much more about that. It's kind of already covered. So then we'll look at Quigley, also in the game only. She's an entomologist. She's researching the Norsabeda odorata larvae because she's studying wasps and they eat larvae, and these are ones of interest to her. And she does this by studying frass contents. And later on, as she and Nancy continue their research, she questions if the Healy is responsible for the increased numbers of the fritillated flag beetles, which the Norsabeda odorata larvae are feasting on. So that she's really research-based. That's what she's all about. And then finally, we can look at Malachi Craven. Also in the game only, he does not have a book counterpart. He is a researcher at the Healy. He is studying plants. He has a terrible temper, and he is responsible for trashing Quigley's camp. So those are our characters. And then just a few items. There's not a lot of overlap between these two stories, so this is actually going to be pretty brief. So the main thing we want to look at is surfing and debt. So these are the main plot points that remain the same between the two stories, with both perpetrators, so Ruby, Pua, and Mike. Mike not so much as far as surfing, but they're all dealing with financial problems. But otherwise, surfing is a big thing for both Ruby and Pua. And then we have scientific research, which is only in the game. It's the storyline for Nancy. It's sort of her main thing. And she's learning about plant hybridization, sorting through frass contents, and learning about various insects. And also we can sort of make that note about solar energy kind of being mentioned. So we have this fairly informative part of the game about, research and science that we don't see in the book. And then we have mythical beings also only in the game. So we've got Kaneokala and Pele, who are blamed for various incidences and natural phenomena that occur on the island. And we don't hear or read about them in the book. So with that, the last thing I'm going to go over is the ending. So quite different. And we've got the book where we have Josh who's kidnapped by Cutter, who does this for Ruby. Nancy, Danny, and Bess go to her houseboat and find him there. They've kind of figured out that Ruby's involved in this. Ruby then arrives and she douses Nancy in kerosene as well as the boat and threatens to set it on fire. She's absolutely desperate. And then Hank shows up, who she still has feelings for, and it creates this additional tension, and she asks him to leave, and then she wants to leave with him. Now, meanwhile, George has been injured, so she's not with her friends, and she knew that they were going to Ruby's houseboat, so she called the police ahead of time to make sure that they got out there. So they arrive just as Ruby's trying to get into the boat with Hank, and she drops her lighter and sort of lights her own clothes on fire, and she and Nancy go into the water. Nancy pushes her into the water to make sure that the fire is put out. And then, of course, the police arrived and they're saved, and end of the game, or rather end of the book, or end of the mystery aspect. Then we have the actual surfing competition. Spoiler alert if you want to know who wins, it's Josh. Anyhow, we'll move on to the game's ending, where we have Nancy and Frank, who individually find their way into this chamber through lava tubes, and this is where the Mapus have stored the pheromones that they were spraying. The Mapus then both show up. Mike admits defeat pretty quickly and kind of wants to turn himself in. Pua's a little less inclined to give up right away. And then we have another earthquake, and they have to get to different sides, which doesn't entirely make sense. Anyways, Frank beats the Mapus to safety, and then the father-daughter duo give up. And then that's the end of that mystery. And Nancy goes back to cleaning frass jars. So to conclude, we have two stories that have fairly similar settings, so set in Hawaii, and the odd theme in common, so surfing and debt. The 1998 story emphasizes the sport of surfing far more than the game, and uses it as a tool to earn money. The 2006 game includes surfing as more of a hobby of our culprit, who is also trying to get out of debt. However, the story focuses more on research and Hawaiian folklore. The locations provide a nice change from earlier stories, so this nice sort of beach setting, which we hadn't seen before, and it's depicted really beautifully, both in terms of the literature and the visualizations from the game. And the opportunity to learn about Hawaiian culture and interests are depicted well and are great learning opportunities for those not familiar with the area, with surfing, Hawaii's flora and its fauna. And I really enjoyed the book, but I do feel that the game left much to be desired. So there we have it, folks. There is my book-to-game comparison for Mystery on Maui and The Creature of Kapu Cave. I liked the book, like I just said. The game is not my favorite. I don't enjoy it. I don't like the storyline. I think had Her Interactive had it focus more on surfing, I'd be far more interested. And this is, I mean, you can blame Blue Crush for this. When that film came out, I was kind of obsessed with surfing for a while, so I would have loved to have seen a game that really focused on that and learning more about it. I don't know how they would have done it, to be fair. That might have been pretty tricky to accomplish, but I would have enjoyed, I think, far more a story, or game rather, that put the emphasis more on surfing than the other stuff. I don't feel like the title really fits with the game either. I don't feel like we really dive into Kaneokala that much, and you're not really at Kapu Cave frequently, so the title and my expectation of the game don't mesh very well. So that's another issue I have with the game. But that's really it. There's not a whole lot more for me to say about this because it's not a game that I love, and although the book's good, I mean, it's not like absolutely amazing. It's not the best, but I do enjoy it, especially when I compare it with the game. It's far better. So there we go. There's my comparison. I hope you guys found it interesting, and I get to dive into The White Wolf of Icicle Creek next. Thanks so much for sticking around and watching the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye, everyone.